Greetings. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Veil. I'm Stephen Williams. They call me the Good Bishop. Listen, this is going to be a fantastic session tonight. This is going to be so informative. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I appreciate you. I appreciate you joining in. I need you to pass the word that Behind the Veil is on. Stephen Williams here. They call me the Good Bishop. Listen, I'm repping my Selah Bruh shirt tonight. I was supposed to have been repping it last week, but I didn't do it. Hey there, my good sister. Come on in and let the people know. Listen, y'all, everybody, y'all need to jump on tonight because it's going to be so informative. Y'all know how we do. I'm going to play a song. I ain't even going to, wait a minute, that was real country. I'm not even going to play the whole song because I do not want to waste the time that I have to spend with my guest tonight because it is he's dropping some knowledge on us tonight about infrastructure and about all this. Listen, y'all share this with your friends. If you don't be on any podcast, listen, this the one. Join it tonight. Hey, listen, I need everybody who can make sure you go to Behind the Veil on YouTube after this is over and subscribe. Go to Behind the Veil on YouTube and subscribe. We're going to get those listeners up. We don't know what's happening on different platforms, so we're asking you to do that. Y'all know how we do, though. We're going to play a song of the week, and then we're going to get into our conversation. This is an oldie but a good one. It really comes from the Grace Factor. It's a song. It's not from my new CD, and let me thank you all again for your support on the new CD called Good Ground. This one is not on Good Ground. This one is the CD before that. And it's called The Grace Factor. And this is the first track on that song. But thank you so much for your support for Good Ground. And keep downloading and keep sending it. Listen, I was in Canada. We were in France, somewhere. I was in France, and somebody called me to come to France. I'm bouncing. I'm gone. I'm gonna get that check in Jesus' name. Hallelujah. Even if they got a highway over there, I'm gonna go to the right side of the highway, Jonathan. I'm going to the right side. But please tell everybody, come on in. This is our song for the week. It's called We Gonna Trust Him. That's me and Mitchell Goldsmith hanging out, doing a little something. I'm going to play just a smidgen, and then I got to come back because my guest tonight is absolutely on fire. All right, let's do it. Let's go. Yep, there it is. There it is. This is the old.
No matter what it look like, no matter what it feel like, we don't see a way, but
hey, Cynthia.
So, no matter what it look like,
hey, Miss Craven. Rudy Hill is here. Frida. Hey.
Obstacles that are in the way to everything that God has planned. Giving up feels like
all JB fans, come on in.
But on His word we will stand. No matter what it look like, no matter what it feel like, we don't have a choice. So until it comes what? No matter what it look like,
sing, Bishop.
No matter what it feel like, we don't have a choice. So until it comes through, come on, we gon' trust it. Can't nobody do it like my God. Until he comes through, we gon' trust him. Nobody like him until he comes through. I know you feel like God's not there with everything that you're going through. Hey, but the God has said he will be there. He will do what he said he will do.
Come on and clap your hands if you want to. Hey there, we gonna trust him. Thank you, Tasha, for joining us tonight.
I gotta lean on it. I'm gonna trust him until
Sing, boy. That was good.
Good God Almighty. We gonna trust him until he comes through. Come on, clap your hands in this building. Come on, clap your hands. The God that we serve is mighty. He's powerful. And what God is saying is that you must believe in him. Trust him and do not doubt. He will come through. And so we say to you, in this place, you gotta believe his word.
Thank you, Reginald B. Coleman, my main man. I just want to hear this note right here. That was a good one.
Everything in the book, his word receives. Said he will come through for you. Oh, get his word. Then you got to hold on. I said hold on.
You better hold on. Don't you let go.
Because he will come through for you. Hold on. Oh, don't you dare give up.
Don't you give up.
Try you, hold on. Say God will come through for you. Just hold on. You got to hang in there and just hold on. I said the Lord, he will come through for you. Hold on. You can do it. Hold on.
When I get tired, that's my signature. Oh, ba ba ba. That's it right there. That's a good place to slow it down right there. Yes, sir. Listen, God will. He'll do it for you. I feel like a DJ from back in the day. Hold on. We gonna trust him. That's off the Grace Factor project. Stephen L. Williams. That's Stephen L. Williams. Somebody was looking me up today, and they were trying to find me at Steve Williams. No, it's Stephen L. Stephen Williams. Just go look it up. Put it in all of the things and all of the formats. And listen, you can go get it. But thank you so much for supporting me on my new project, the Good Ground project. Listen, I'm gonna have t-shirts coming out. I'm gonna have merch, y'all. The bishop gonna have merch, and this summer we're gonna have merch, and I want you to buy that too. And at the end of this year, y'all not gonna believe it. You're gonna hear it here first. You're gonna hear it here first. I'm gonna release a good old book. I'll have a book by the end of the year. It's already done. It's ready. And I got to get it out and just get some nice pictures and all that good stuff. Listen, I am repping tonight, Selah Brugg. Please go to Instagram and look them up. Selah Sis. We're people who pray and take a moment to find him. Tonight. What an awesome night we are about to have. I have with me a young man. He has, I'm going to read all of it. I'm going to read this, Jonathan, okay? Because Jonathan said, don't read all of it. I can't read all of it, but because he said, but I'm going to read some of it because it's good. So Jonathan L. Bush, you have to let me know what the L is offline. We have to talk about that. Is defining cities across the globe in research and practice with a focus on adaptive reuse, comprehensive planning, healthy cities, place-making, transportation, and urban design. As a project manager for NCPPC, he provides planning and design expertise in the established urban districts, emerging transit nodes, and residential communities. He is responsible for providing technical assistance for the urbanizing core of Montgomery County, advocating for design excellence, shaping future communities. He also serves as co-chair for the agency's Diversity Council, where he co-authored their what is this? Tryon strategy plan. They got a strategy plan and manage the DEI framework for more than 8,000 employees. Jonathan worked for the US DOD partner, managing global healthy facility contracts in East Africa and Thailand. This dude is international. Oh, he spent some time in Shanghai, China, studying mega cities. Go, Jonathan. He launched Longitude Design Group, a planning practice which offers project managing, neighborhood planning, and implementation strategies, and serves as an adjunct professor of the Department of Business Administration for at Community College at Philadelphia, with a focus on their dual partnership with Drexel University. Man, what else did he do? He created Jonathan Will, a scholarship for minority students of exceptional aptitude. Jonathan is a TEDx speaker and co-founder of Empowerment Magazine, a 2015 Yale University Strategies and Magazine Media Award recipient. Man, he's a contributor to HuffPost and Thrive Global. Oh my God, Jonathan has more credentials than I do. He is professional certified. He is CPTED professional certified through the American Crime Prevention Institution and is on the LEED lead and AICP track for early 2021. It's a whole lot of stuff. Assigned Research Foundation Scholar Jonathan holds, let me get to the good part. He holds a degree from Georgetown University, North Carolina A&T State University, and a certificate from the Community Development Academy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And that joker really was brought up at Goodwill Baptist Church. All that stuff said, he's just brought up. He's just a good dude. I am excited tonight to bring to you this wonderful guest. Get yourselves ready. Can everybody give up some love for Jonathan? They call him JB Bush. Thank you, sir, for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me. Only you, but thank you for having me. Hey, everybody. I don't know who's all online. I know this is on several platforms, but hey, everybody. It just feels good to always be speaking to family, extended family, and yeah. So let's get to it.
Listen, y'all, this is about to be off the chain. Jonathan, Pastor Alberta heard him on a radio show, and she called me and asked me if I to talk about it. And I immediately called him once I got his information. I think I already had his number, and I called him and I asked him, could we talk about that. And man, our conversation was so powerful. And we were talking about President Joe Biden and his new infrastructure, $1 billion infrastructure packet that he is planning to submit, I guess, to Congress, and they're voting on it. And that was the genesis of our conversation. And from there, we began to talk about what infrastructure does and what it does not do. And Jonathan is the foremost expert on that, in my opinion, from the information that he has given me. It has awakened my mind and my spirit, if you will. And so I really want to go directly into that. What is this thing on the infrastructure and the laws, and how do you see it from your vantage point in your place of expertise? Talk to us about that infrastructure piece, which was our trigger.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. But again, as you mentioned, President Joe Biden and his administration, he is touting this big infrastructure plan. So if you watch the news, if you're on any social media platform, you've been hearing about this infrastructure plan. I think the dollar amount is changing, but I thought I read yesterday that it was at $2.2 trillion. That's a lot of money that the federal government is throwing at what they're calling an infrastructure plan. And I think it's important that people understand what is infrastructure. And infrastructure is everything that you are touching on a day-to-day basis, from your highways to your roads, to ports and waterways. We don't have them locally here in Winston, but your ports and your waterways is how you get all of your goods and services, your clothes that you buy, the lumber that you're purchasing from Lowe's and Home Depot. All of those things are coming through ports and waterways. Your airports, improvements to your airports, improvements to your wastewater and stormwater management systems. The plan also has in it, including expanding broadband internet to places where we necessarily do not have internet. And many of us that have been teleworking during COVID, teaching kids during COVID, we certainly can attest to the need for better internet connectivity in a lot of our communities and a lot of our neighborhoods. This infrastructure plan will address that. It will also address our improving our electric grid, and also starting the conversation, releasing our reliance so much on the electrical grid. We just saw what happened in Texas during the winter when they were relying on electric grid when they had a inclement weather or a natural disaster event, I mean, if you will. The good thing I like about Biden's infrastructure plan, too, is that it goes beyond highways, roads, providing clean drinking water. A lot of our communities do not have clean drinking water. It also discusses housing. Housing is infrastructure. And for so long, housing has not been looked at as infrastructure. And within this package, it talks about building new homes, retrofitting existing homes, and preserving things that need to be preserved. So that's yeah, that is how our conversation got started.
And from there, y'all, I started asking questions. For those of you who know me,
Yeah.
I went directly into him. I don't even know if I let him breathe. I had so many questions. I was just throwing at them because I had questions, and I wanted him. I mean, right off the gate, I wanted him to talk about the thing that just got me started was during in the Industrial Revolution. Why there is an East Winston, which is predominantly black, or on east or southern tip. And this is in every city that I've been to. I've been to 26 of them in the United States. All right. I had this thing. I wanted to do 50. By the time I was 50, and so I have not made that because I've not had a reason to go to South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, all of Nebraska. Ain't nothing out there that I can figure out. So I got to find out why to go there. But I missed that part. But in every city, there seems to be an east side of town and a west side of town. And most of the times, the African American or the black is on the east side of town. And I need you all to hear what he learned as to why that was a genesis and why that started. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So to everyone who's listening on this call, if you have the ability to acknowledge that you're on the call, whether it's through a double tap on social media or commenting, if you've been to places like Detroit, East Palo Alto, California, Chicago, Los Angeles, if you've been overseas to London, to Paris, to East Jerusalem,
Mhm.
Philadelphia, we'll bring it home to North Carolina, East Winston, High Point, Durham, East Greensboro. If you've been to any of those places, acknowledge that through your social media. And so Bishop Williams and I forget how you posed the question to me, but I thought it was worth noting that in all of these places on the east sides of town, who lives there? It's people that look a lot like you and me. Even in my hometown of Lexington, on the east side of what used to be Raleigh Road, those people look a lot like me and you, and there's a reason for that. Where we choose to locate people in cities is always intentional. It's never by happenstance. No one just picks a place to choose. There is a great TED talk by anthropologist Stephen DeBerry. He is an African American boss in his own right, but he did a TED talk on why we do find that Black people live on the east sides of these cities. And the best example that I could give to you is imagine yourself sitting around a campfire and that the smoke begins to blow. When the smoke begins to blow, the smoke typically goes in one direction. Well, who's responsible for sitting in the direction of the smoke? It's always the people with the least influence, the least amount of power, the least amount of revenue and clout. And so that's what's happening or has happened in a lot of our cities. Um, there's evidence that all of these cities were smokestack cities. They were furniture, textile, automobile, um, you name it. I mean, and you can look around just in the 336. You see smokestacks, those big tall things that smoke just pillow out every single day. Well, when that wind begins to blow, it typically is going in an easterly direction, and so they know that that's where pollution goes. They know that those environments towards the east of the city, they can be harmful in nature as far as the environmental pollutants, and so that's why you oftentimes find a high concentration of blacks or African Americans, whatever we are calling ourselves. That's why you find us east of these east in these cities. You also find us typically east of highways or east of rivers, Washington D.C., east of the Anacostia, and that's the reason why. So again, back to just what they call smokestack dispersion. And I also want to just further the notion that design is always intentional. How we design cities, how we design where people choose to live, work, play, worship, go to school, all of those things are always intentional. And if you begin to look at the eastern parts of your cities, you will then notice that there is weight and there's significant evidence to that. But I encourage everyone at your leisure to also look at the TED Talk. Again, it's by Stephen T. Berry, and it talks about the prevailing winds and how they flow east and how those communities have been historically underserved for generations. Going back, to many of the listeners, it'll be our grandparents, our great grandparents. They've been historically impacted, and so we see this still perpetuating today.
When you because when we started talking about this, look, you're only gonna find this information on Behind the Veil from the church side. Amen. Everybody talking about that from the church side. The good bishop will pick up some good information. Because when Jonathan and I were talking, because wait a minute, JB, I struggle with that too. Are we black, African American? I call us black.
I like black. I like
Okay.
being black. I'm black.
call where black people are, right? And I'm no offense to anybody else. I just want to.
I'm black all day.
I want to be black. I want to be black today. All right. So when we start talking about this, so what he's saying is that the prevailing winds flow east, and so this is why a lot of the when he talks about the pollutants and the can you imagine? Just think about this in every city. If that's the case, the prevailing winds, and thank you for the information, then it's no wonder that there is a bunch of sickness on that side because you're having to contend with a lot of the pollution and what his expertise is city planning. And so what you're hearing him say is everything that they plan, when they plan things, it is intentional.
It is intentional.
And so when he talks about that, I asked him a question. This is not one of our questions, but I asked him a question about the highway. Can you tell me what you said? Because when I was riding down the highway, have you all ever been driving down the highway and you see how the trees really are symmetrical? And you really do think, man, did nature do this where those trees are symmetrical? But what he explained to me is even when you're driving down the highway, the trees are intentional.
Absolutely. To his question, he was asking, you notice a symmetrical row of trees. In the work that I do, we're responsible. So when a developer, whether it's, Bishop Williams and his wife, they just want to build a house, or whether it's a big developer that they are developing some major project, some skyscraper, or some huge subdivision with 200 to 300 homes. Those plans are then submitted to an agency like where I work. Then we review those plans against what the law says that they must do. And the law is going to evaluate the environment, what kind of housing you're going to provide. Is that apartments? Is that studios? Is that single family? Is it going to be all brick? Is it going to be siding? And the law will then dictate these homes must be brick, or these homes can be siding, or they must be a combination of siding and brick. And then we get into the finite details about parking and loading. How many parking spaces? Where is the parking located? How much window space will you have in this building that will allow natural light to filter into this building to keep people healthy? Because we know that light keeps people healthy. And then to the landscaping piece, the biggest example that I can give locally that you see if you're driving down Highway 52 or driving up Highway 52 North, and you notice where the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Street exits used to be, you now see rows of trees along the embankment. Well, those trees are serving two purposes. One, to protect the environment by capturing stormwater runoff. That means during a big rain event, those trees are there to keep 52 from flooding. The second reason, more than likely, that those trees are planted there is what we call, big fancy term, for noise attenuation. That means we're trying to keep the noise that 52 brings. When we're flying, we got our road rage, we are trying to leave work and get home or get to wherever we're going. The trees are there to help buffer that noise, to keep it from spilling over into the adjacent communities. If you'll notice, you'll typically see one type of tree. It's always like an oak tree, some variation of oak, and then you'll see those evergreens that are behind it. Those evergreens, they never shed their leaves and things like that. So all of that's intentional. Nothing about city planning ever just happens by happenstance, and we say, "Oh, we think it'll look good." The Another local example that you may find, those of you in Winston, is how downtown Winston is redeveloped, and you see like some of the former R.J. Reynolds factories have been redeveloped. Bishop Williams read in my bio about adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is where we take an old building and turn it into something new. So good examples of that is, the Sears building downtown Winston. Was housed Wachovia. A lot of those former factories downtown Winston are now housing restaurants and apartments and condominiums. And so you see it throughout the city. And so, again, just to Bishop Williams' point, it design is intentional. How we plan cities is intentional, and the intricate details of what we do in cities, and what we do in certain neighborhoods and what we don't do in certain neighborhoods, it is intentional.
Now, because you said something that struck a chord. You said there were two things you said. You said we know that light brings in, so with windows, that light brings in life. And
Yes.
then you said that in order for oh man, you said the life, and then you said it has to be approved, or it's a law that you have to make it. So who makes that law?
Sure. Perfect question. So when I speak of the law, I'm speaking of your local zoning ordinances. So every city, every neighborhood, every community across America, you have zoning ordinances. And the zoning ordinances sometimes are very weak. And I can even kind of pinpoint to you in neighborhoods where I can just drive and look to say the zoning ordinances in these neighborhoods are very weak because they're allowing, for lack of better words, too much to be happening in this neighborhood, or too much to be occurring on this street, or doesn't look good. It's not well kept. Or why is it that we'll build this type of housing type in this neighborhood, but it's not allowed in this type of neighborhood? Why is it that you drive down certain streets and you have tree-lined streets and sidewalks, and you go into other neighborhoods and there are no sidewalks and there are no tree-lined streets? Why is it that you pull up to the KFC on this side of town and their trash unloading space is covered by a nice fence or nice brick wall, and then you go to this KFC on this side of town and there is no protection from this dumpster, and you see the rodents and the pests and the debris and just all spilling out? It's down to your zoning ordinance. And so who makes those laws? Your local elected officials. I am not by any means an elected official. Politics does not interest me. I just happen to work in a field where it's a delicate line that I'm dancing every day with elected officials. But your elected officials are your district, typically your city councilors or your district councilors or your county council. They are the ones who are implementing your zoning laws.
So if the laws are that way, now you've taken us somewhere that I wasn't expecting to go. But if the laws are that way, it seems to me, this is not you, it seems to me that in the Black neighborhoods, they do not execute the same measure of law on the white side of town. And the question is, why the disparate? Why do you do? Why, like for instance, at the KFC? Because I'm looking at some restaurants. Fortunately, I guess I live on the other side of
The tracks.
52.
Okay.
I live on the other side of 52, right? And we're going to talk about that. On my side, I would know, I see those beautiful fences. And then when I go on the other side, there are no fences. Why is there a disparaging in either neighborhood? Why isn't it just zoning, period? Is that intentional?
It is intentional. That's a very valid question. It could be a myriad of reasons. So I don't want to pinpoint and say it's always this reason based on, we like to always assert or use its race. Sometimes it is historically racially motivated. Other times it can be cost. Well, the city may not have the resources to staff enough of their code enforcement staff to make sure that all of these neighborhoods are abiding by the local zoning laws, cutting your grass, keeping your grass cut. If your fence, you've got fences that are breaking in your yard, is there someone serving you a notice after so many days? If your neighbor's gutters are just hanging off the house, is there someone that's coming by there to check to make sure? Many of us now, we live in communities where we have HOA, home ownership associations. Everyone who has ever lived in a place where there's an HOA knows many times that HOAs don't play. They're not going to give you but so many days to come into compliance with whatever those laws that are set forth. But when you look at just cities at large, more times than not, it's about resources and where those tax dollars are and are not being spent. And typically, you do see in neighborhoods that have less of us, that they look and feel and behave and sound a certain way.
I love this guy. He is so good at what he does. That's why he's Jonathan with all of these degrees. That's why I'm just little old Bishop, because I'd be like, y'all, they don't do it the same way on the other side of the tracks. It's different. I promise you, because I just went down a place today or yesterday, whatever, this weekend, and I'm looking at the housing over there. They have sidewalks, and I took my daughter and I was showing her a neighborhood, and this is no lie. I was showing her a neighborhood, and the houses were huge. And here comes a little boy. He was a little boy. He was riding on a bicycle. He couldn't have been no more than 5, 6. And he was riding by himself. We didn't see him. We didn't see parents. And I looked at Mackenzie and I said, I said, "You see that little boy?" And she said, "Why? Yeah, why is he out here by himself?" And I said, she said, "Isn't he afraid he's going to be taken?" And I said, "Not in this neighborhood, sweetie."
Right.
I said, "Not in this neighborhood." 30, maybe 20 yards away, it was his parents. You would never see that because there are sidewalks, there were places that he could go. And it's just interesting that you would say that this is done by the zoning law. So is that same principle, and let's get to kind of what your the specialty or what drove this. Is that the same measure that they go into to say, we're going to do this infrastructure and we're going to build this highway? Is that, do they just consider the ones who are disadvantaged, if you will, or maybe not as educated enough to fight? Is that why? Because in every city, Greensboro, High Point, Durham, DC, Atlanta, as he said, Chicago, LA. Yeah, because I went to LA and you could go, they would always tell me, you can go right here, but don't you go over there. Because if you go over there, we're not responsible. And it was like a one road over. So when they build these roads or these cities, what is the intent and why do they do this? Is it designed to divide? Is that a fair
Historically,
question?
is a very fair question. Historically, yes. So, in our conversation initially, when you had invited me to come on, we talked about a book called The Color of Law. And the Color of Law, I highly recommend this book for everybody to read, even if you're not a reader. The book is worth you purchasing. It's by Richard Rothstein, and he uncovers all of the laws that the federal government approved and enacted to suppress or to keep Black people historically underserved. So, to Bishop Williams' point, he's talking about highways. Well, the highways came about with through the Dwight Eisenhower administration. The goal was to get highways across America so that we could travel and go and be whatever we needed to be. This was so pivotal because the federal government even partnered with the major motor companies, Ford and GM. And if there are people on the call who are old enough to remember, like a lot of the rail car communities, I don't know the demographics of your audience, Bishop Williams, but if they're old enough to remember, a lot of these cities and towns had streetcars where where they could just walk to places. And highways came and ripped through these places. Well, oftentimes the major automobile makers, they lobbied with the federal government to encourage people to buy cars. How did they do that? Well, they started building houses with carports. And the goal was, if Pastor Steve and I are driving in a car, if we're riding on a bus trying to get to work, and we keep passing houses with carports, the goal is you have a nice car, you sell this person a nice car so that they can show off this car in their carport, and then it will make us want to buy a car. Another way that the federal government allowed these things to take place is that the automobile makers would then buy up the rail stations, and they would make people deliberately late for work, and oftentimes in Black communities, so that you ended up having to buy a car. And so there's all these ways that the federal government has worked historically against us, to keep us historically underserved. We've talked about smokestack diversions and the prevailing winds east and keeping us kind of environmentally unhealthy. Now you talk about adding another expense of an automobile, that makes us at a social disadvantage or an economic disadvantage, because more times than not, we didn't have the income or the necessary means to even purchase a car in the first place. And so you talk about that, but this book uncovers so many federal policies and laws. One of the major things that this book talks about is a thing called redlining. Redlining was a federal act that told banks where they could and could not lend money. And there are, you can Google it. There will be maps of any major U.S. city. You will probably find some for the cities in the 336 as well. But oftentimes, it's the places where banks could not lend money, were all of the times those are Black communities. And so you think about when how people generate wealth. More times than not, people are generating wealth through real estate and home ownership. So if you don't have a home to pass down to your children, and if you don't have access to good schools and good neighborhoods, then it puts you at a disadvantage and puts you way behind the curve of your counterparts. And oftentimes the counterparts historically have been white people. We now have more of a melting pot where we're talking about the Latinos and Asian Pacific Americans, but historically it's just been a white and Black issue. And so I encourage again everyone to go and check this book out. It's called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And it just talks about all of the laws that have historically held, yes, the title's there on your screen, that has held us to a significant disadvantage. So again, back to what we are continuously saying throughout this conversation is it's intentional, and design has been intentional.
Listen, here is a quote that I wanted to read you all from the book. This is in paragraph, I think it's in chapter number 2. Check this out. Listen to what it says. It says public housing's original purpose was to give shelter not to those too poor to afford it, but to those who could afford decent housing but couldn't find it because none was available. So this happened in the World War and World War II. And when they were building the houses, what they wanted is that they wanted the white people to be closer to the factories.
Absolutely.
So they built public housing, the projects, so that they wouldn't have to travel far to come to work. In the book, it says that Black people couldn't go to that particular public housing. So they had to travel further to get to work. So it was not designed for us to stay in the projects. That was not its original design. When they started allowing Black people into the projects, they started making laws so that whites could then afford houses outside of the projects, and they let the Black people come in and rent the projects. And even when they made the projects, they would make the projects big for the whites so it could fit 4 people. And the projects that they would build for the Blacks, it could fit 2 people, and they would put 8 in them.
Correct. And Bishop Williams, if I could even add, the book even goes further to state that once they allowed Blacks to start living in these projects, then laws also started being enacted to provide loans for whites to go and live in suburbs. And so that's how a lot of your suburb towns came to be, because they were allowed loans. And even when they were marginally able to be approved for these loans, they were able to go and get these loans and build houses, again, creating generational wealth for their families. And then you think about when you move out to the suburbs, where historically people went to the suburbs because it's fresher air, it's cleaner air. And then they also would be able to get a car. And then you look at what happens to the little Black boy, the little Black girl in the communities when they see a car pass by their street or their neighborhood, and their family does not have a car. Well, it adds pressure. And so mom and dad find a way we're always trying to assimilate ourselves to that next class, but it always comes at a cost. And we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to pay the cost that it takes to, I guess, get to that level?
Listen, it was something else in there that, look, Jonathan just got me. I had the book, but at his encouragement, I really started picking it up and started reading it. And one of the things that I thought was so funny is that, like, if Jonathan, if a white person wanted to have Jonathan buy their house, right? The realtors, according to the law, then would tell everybody in that neighborhood, the blacks are coming, and it was a law that your land would depreciate in value.
Absolutely.
And so the real estate agent was in cahoots with the bank, which was in cahoots with the courts, because these were all the things that were on the law. And they would leave and let all the black people come into this neighborhood and then devalue the land. And it's like that. I don't care what y'all say. It's like that even to this day. When you go somewhere and you try to move into it, it's good that one family move in it, but move about 3 of y'all in there and see what will happen to that neighborhood. People will start exiting out of the neighborhood. And I didn't know, Jonathan, when the law changed. I do know it may have changed, but it seems to be a subconscious, if you will, of the people. It seems to be passed down generation to generation, that we'll let one of y'all in, but we're not going to let 2 or 3.
Yes. And to your point, I always like to give like real life examples of to help people to understand, because oftentimes those of us who work in government, we work in city planning, or we work in a field, we always have all this language that's hard to understand. Those of you who have streaming services, if you have Amazon Prime, there is a show called Them on
Yes.
Amazon Prime. I highly encourage you to watch it. It may be sensitive to some in nature, only because it does have some scary parts. So that's my disclosure, that to protect Bishop Williams' show. But I encourage you to check that out, simply because it highlights a lot of the racial motivation when it came to real estate. And it is spot on, it is accurate, and those things happened, and those things still happen. I work at an agency where oftentimes we still see covenants, or deeds where it says no Negro could inhabit this home. Of course, they're not enforceable, they're not legal, but you still see it in the language of when these deeds are pulled for a lot of these older
Wow.
properties. And then we have mechanisms in place just to make sure that the future buyers are not in any way um, subjected to that language. And so that was, it was legal. And just to what Bishop Williams just stated, those things happened. Um, and you mentioned some other point I wanted to highlight. I can't think of what it was, but I'll talk about highways. Highways oftentimes were more times than not created to get people to white suburbs. My
Now, before
thesis
you
was
go in there,
on.
John,
Uh-huh.
hold on a second, because I wanted to talk to you about that, because that whole notion about the highways is um, not only getting us there, but when we start talking about this, we get excited. And this is what Jonathan and I were talking about. We get excited when we say, oh, they're going to have infrastructure, they're going to have roadways. We're getting ready to maybe get jobs. We're getting ready to make some money because they're going to need cement, and we're going to make some. It's going to be great. 25, $30, $40 an hour, and I want you to talk about, Jonathan, because we've been excited about these highways and these bridges, but they are by design. Now go for it. Talk, because I want to kill this whole notion. Maybe we ought not be as excited as we think we are. But go ahead.
Sure. So historically, highways were created to promote white flight. My thesis in graduate school was on a highway in DC that many people may be familiar with, called 295. Well, when we started doing our research, the legislation, the people that wrote to the government and asked the government to approve this highway, The reasons why they wanted this highway to be approved, as written in the legislation, was to promote white flight and to rid DC of Negro slums. That's written in the legislation. And so that was the entire purpose for these millions of dollars that were put forth to build this highway. That Highway 295 led to the suburbs in Prince George's County that are now predominantly black. But when they were built, for those of you who are on the call who may be familiar, that's Temple Hills and Capitol Heights and District Heights, Bladensburg, those communities, that it was specifically built to promote white flight so that white families could have single family homes with garages, with carports, with front yards, backyards, side yards. And it was built to take away a lot of the Negro slums, what they called them, because the highway tore down and went right through a lot of black neighborhoods in Southeast and Northeast Washington, D.C. at the time. That statement also holds true for many of America's highways. I was telling Bishop Williams and his assistant on the call before joining that I remember as a little boy growing up here in North Carolina, that when they brought I-40 through, I-40 ripped through some of those black neighborhoods in Clemensville Road. We had people that we went to church with that lived right there off of Clemensville Road, and it changed the entire fabric of Clemensville Road, Thomasville Road, forever. Spread some of the neighborhoods that radiated or came off of like Sprague Street. It changed the fabric of those communities forever. And some of those neighborhoods have never returned to what they were in the 80s and prior to me, even what I remember, but they've never returned because these highways are always going to take the path of least resistance. And what I mean when I say that is that when a highway is built, or when a government entity looks to build something, they're looking in places where it's the cheapest to do business. It has not a lot of opposition, or it does not have a lot of influence or clout that would prevent impediments. And then oftentimes too, it does not have environmental features or cultural resources that we deem worth saving. And so I'd always like to give like local examples. Wendover Avenue is another example. East Market Street, Murrow Boulevard in Greensboro is another great local example of how when these roads were built, Murrow Boulevard, to your point, was never finished because it had a lot of backlash. And then back to Biden's infrastructure plan. This plan has not that I am promoting. Again, I'm not a politician by any means, but this particular plan has a lot of good pieces to it that we have not seen in our lifetime. And one of the things that this plan has money that's tied to it that it seeks to address is to tear down a lot of these highways that ran through black neighborhoods and redevelop them, rejuvenate them, revitalize them. That is a positive thing. And that is something that we should be applauding. That is something that we should be holding our local, state, federal elected officials to make sure that they vote. Because when you look at a lot of the neighborhoods where we no longer want to live, we don't want to live there because they don't have the resources and things that we've become so accustomed to in our creature comforts. And so this plan is worth us looking at. It's worth us paying attention to.
Man, listen, I'm. Can you all see what Jonathan is kind of showing us? Because what they did in the Color of Law, and I challenge everybody, please go get the book, download it, read it, take your time. I've highlighted it because what the idea is, whatever road is coming through the city, the concept that they used for the projects was they would build the projects smaller so that the blacks would basically run on top of each other. And so when Jonathan was giving me clarity of what I'm thinking about, what those roads and highways do is they shorten the black community, like they shortened the community so that now you really on top of each other. The day I took my daughter, we go to Peace Haven and I show her how houses are apart. They are apart. I won't go down the road, but they're apart. And we ride through and we see that there is yard, there is space. And I take her to the black side of town, and the houses are so close that you can't park a car
in between
on
them.
the side. You have to park the car on the side of the road. And we made this comparison of, and this is what I was telling her. I said, Jonathan, you're gonna love this. She said, well, where we live is okay. I said, yes, it's because I paid attention to details late.
Hmm.
And I said, when we go to the white side of town, I said, they paid attention to details early. And when we go to the black side of town, they don't pay attention to the details. And it was evident that if you pay attention to details, if I had started earlier, I'm an extraordinary black man with an extraordinary gift. I am a king. But if I live average because I did not pay attention to the details early. Now, we can say what we want to say, but the concept is they have these rules in place for us and they shorten it. And so we rob each other because we're on top of each other in that neighborhood. And that infrastructure comes through to shorten that gap. It shortens the gap. And that's the same method that they use when they created projects. It was by design so that we would self-destruct. And then they put the suburbs and they let them go that way because they, like Jonathan said, that was smart to build carports to put cars in it so that when people saw it, they would want a car. And now they put 2-car garages or 3-car garages because that's the indication that you've made it. And now you want to go. You may not see the car, but now you know it's 3-car garage. They must be doing something. But it's interesting how on my side of town, I sit in the middle. And I mean, 10 minutes one way is one way. 10 minutes another way. Going east, it's I'm 10 minutes from each one of them. And it's major how that is by design.
Certainly. Absolutely. I would even add to that, again, back to the zoning laws. In a lot of major cities now, they don't even allow houses with carports. I grew up in a house with a carport, but a lot of major cities do not allow houses with carports simply because it's also a safety issue. We always know when you're home. So if someone is trying to break into your home, they know when you leave, when you get back. They know you're going to leave the light on, the porch light on. And so that also impacts homeowners insurance rates and auto insurance rates. All land use decisions, they are all tied to so many other things that impact us. And so you notice sometimes in communities of color or black communities, we pay higher insurance rates for homeowners, and we pay higher for auto insurance rates. And sometimes that is a factor. It could be a whole lot of other factors, but
Right.
that is a factor. We also see sometimes in zoning laws, you mentioned about garages. Well, in a lot of communities, you see garages that face a street. And in some communities, they're not allowed. The garage must be rear facing or it must be to the side. You must drive around the side of the house to get to the garage. Or in some of your closer knit neighborhoods that you see popping up in cities, the garage is in the rear. So it's kind of like an alley street, getting back to what we saw like in the 30s and 40s when cars first kind of were really coming onto the scene. And so, again, it just goes back to what's legally allowed in your zoning ordinance. And the thing that I always say whenever I'm doing any public speaking is that land use has no color. Law has a color. And land use is green. It's green no matter where you go. But when we start making decisions who gets to benefit and who doesn't, oftentimes that's when we start to see um, the inequities and the disparities that exist in our cities.
Now, do you still see this? Because I wanted to ask a question, because you said these things come in. You're a part of this planning process. You're a part of the zoning piece, and you know who. Are there? And this may not be a fair question, but are there a lot of you that's sitting at that table? Because if there are not a lot of you sitting at this table, then whatever laws, like there's no pushback to change or to help those laws. It seems that it would be skewed.
Oh, absolutely. I do think I am in a profession where it is skewed. There's been a big push. I mean, even before I got into the profession, to get more blacks into the profession. And so I work in an agency where there are a significant amount of blacks, but the one thing we also have in our zoning ordinance is that we have what's called an equity framework. And so the conversation of equity and making sure that we're being equitable and fair across the board, it's built into the law. And so everything down to something you and I were talking about before we went live is that, when a developer, let's say they're building an apartment building or a condominium building, we have laws that state so many of those units in that building must be set aside for affordable housing. And so that's like law number one. That's benchmark number one the developer has to meet. Now, once they show us that, then you tell us how many units are you proposing in this building. Now I need to see your plans, because I now need to see where you're choosing to locate the affordable housing, because the law does not allow you to co-locate all of the low income housing into one part of the building, to the lower floors where they don't necessarily have a nice view, or we don't allow you to locate them all to the top, where nobody else is being bothered by what they deem as, how affordable housing people behave. So there are laws in place. So I'm fortunate that I do work for a place where equity is built in. Do we have things to work on? Absolutely. But again, we're at the mercy more times than not of our elected officials, because the elected officials are the ones who put the laws in place. When you get to someone like me, I'm reviewing what you're trying to do and making sure that you meet the law so that I can get you approved.
Yeah, but when I go back, so Jonathan he works in DC. All right. And so DC for us is rather progressive. But just think about this in the context of, what about South Carolina? What about deep North Carolina? What about the places that I grew up, Rockingham, North Carolina, that may not have an African American sitting on the board? So just when we're thinking about these things, it is something that you can see the disparity. You can see how it cannot be fair and equitable when it comes to that, depending on who is what. I grew up in the projects. Rudy Hill says, Bishop, the Cross 52 project here in Winston-Salem is behind a lot of these moves in East Winston. I believe that. I grew up in the projects, and you said something, and my sister and I are going to talk about this when we get off live, because one of the things that you said struck a chord in me because you took me back to 705 Armstead Street. There was no light coming into those project houses. And when I think about the projects, there's no light. There's no full light that when I go to my other side, it's full of windows and lights. And then when I go on the east side, there are no windows. So there is no light. And you said light heals or something to that effect. You said it earlier. And I'm like, whoa, I can see us playing in the projects and there is no light.
Absolutely. We know through countless studies what light does to the body, what it does to the mental health. So even some of the projects that I work on for like big commercial office spaces, the law regulates, the zoning ordinance regulates how big those windows must be, where they must be located on the building. And then we get into the intricacies telling you your office space where people are sitting need to be on this side of the building because this is the place that's going to get the maximum amount of exposure. Because we know when people don't have a lot of natural light, we know that they are vitamin D deficient. We know and what vitamin D deficiencies do to the body. I know that there are probably some healthcare professionals on this live call. We know that people have mental disorders or cognitive dysfunctions because they're not receiving enough light and natural air. If you notice during the pandemic, um, I myself am included. I've never wanted to be outside so much since I was a little boy. Like I crave outdoors because I'm working from home during a pandemic and I'm like this all day long and looking at plans. Now you see a national conversation of we need more parks. We need more parks that are closer to people's jobs and closer to people's homes. They want bike lanes. They want wider sidewalks. You see all these outdoor dining establishments that would have probably never been dining out, last July in the heat of the day, but people want to be outside. And so the zoning ordinance, again, it sets the framework for what is and what is not allowed in your communities. And oftentimes in our communities, you are absolutely right. Our windows are not big, and that's a zoning ordinance. Because if a developer is not required to do it, they're not going to do it. And you can't to that note also you can't blame a developer because a developer is in the business of making money. And
Right.
so if a developer if the law says, hey, I need you to have 20% windows, larger windows than what you're proposing here in these plans, then the developer either sometimes will back off the table and say, wait, that's not what I really want to do. Or they may do it, but then that cost is then passed on to the person who's going to live or work in that building.
So is that why my street has a bike lane?
Absolutely. That is laws. You probably have, if you have bike lanes, that probably means you have wider sidewalks, you have tree lined streets. All of that's the law. A developer is just not going to just do that. Very, very rarely. I mean, you certainly will get some developers that say, we want to do what's good for the community, but if there's a cost associated with that, there is a cost, and those costs are not cheap.
So okay, you keep opening up other questions for me. So because you keep saying, okay, it's not cheap. All right. But who's paying for the bike lane on my side of the street? And then when I ride the bike eastward, I don't have a bike lane. And what that does is it deters me from going eastward. So who
Absolutely.
paid? Because when I moved here, there wasn't no bike lane.
Right. So
And now I got a bike lane on both sides of the road. And when I go where I live, it takes me. And when that bike lane goes out, guess what? That's where I stop. Cause I'll be like, y'all look like y'all gonna kill me if I keep going on this side. Cause there is no protection.
there's safety.
Ain't no safety for me. So I don't go. Is that by design to keep
Absolutely.
to keep us, because I'm one of them that they just let in the neighborhood because I don't cause no trouble. And I always tell people, and Jonathan, I'm gonna say this because it's my show and I can say it. Anybody want to be mad? I said they utilize me because, and I often tell people, do not get it twisted. I am black, but there is another black that you don't want, that I don't present. All right. I present calm, but I know another black that I turn this place out.
All right.
And they don't allow that other black. They don't give them y'all. I'm being honest. They don't give them space. They
Very
do
true.
not. They do not give them access. And people ask me, how have you maintained to do what you do? And I always tell people that I meet, because I'm a door. If I jack this door up, they might not let any more of you in.
Very true.
And I've carried the weight of that to make sure I don't respond the way, because again, I'm on the bike lane. And when I get there, it's really designed, y'all, to keep you in just a little space, because the amenities that I have on my side are not necessarily the amenities that's 15 minutes down the road.
You're right. I often say with neighborhoods or cities, cities send a strong message to its citizens when they don't have sidewalks, they don't have parks, or their parks are lacking, big time, or it's overgrown, or the equipment's malfunctioning or broken, or it's not nicely painted. They send a very strong message to the people who would benefit from those services, because for one, sidewalks is the first thing I think of. It keeps you healthy because it keeps you mobile, and it
Keep you up.
also gives you alternative ways to get to a place outside of a car. And so not everyone can afford a car. Not everyone needs to have multiple vehicles in their driveway. That is a sign that we're really doing something when we have more than one car in our driveway. But just think, if we could walk to get that cup of coffee. Just think, if we could walk to pick our kids up from school, or just to that notion, we don't see a lot of kids walking to and from school anymore like we did, in the 80s and prior to. I walked to school the majority of the time, K through 3. Sometimes I remember walking to school like in the 4th grade, but I very rarely see in my mom's neighborhood kids walking to school anymore. It's not something that you see. um, and again, that's not only just the burden of the city, but it's just the trend that parents tend to drive their children, for safety reasons. For kids have more bags now. They've got lunch bag, gym bag, laptops. All of these things that they need in order to learn. But when cities don't have these things, it sends a very strong message. You asked me a question: who pays for bike lanes? Cities or neighborhoods have a lot of ways to do it. Some of the ways that they do it is that they make the developer pay for it. So, like in newer communities, you'll see it's passed on to the developer, which is then passed on to the homeowner, or if it's a office complex, it's passed on to the developer. If you're like in an existing community and you're getting sidewalks and you're getting bike lanes or tree lined streets, or they're taking the power lines down and placing them underground to reduce the visual clutter and all of these wires that are dangling above our heads. Those are oftentimes passed on to the taxpayer. The taxpayer is paying for that through some mechanism. Either you voted for a bond, or they've increased taxes, or if, let's say, I'm just using as an example because I don't know, but let's say the whole in Winston, the whole Bailey Power Plant redevelopment efforts, there could have been something in that package to say, well, a certain amount of funds that that you're proposing to do here is going to be allocated into these other neighborhoods to give sidewalks and bike lanes so that people can get to your establishment.
Wow. Listen, y'all, I need to read something else from The Color of Law. Now, this was in 1910, all right? And this was something that was adopted back up in Baltimore, all right? And this was by a lawyer, a Milton Dadish. I'm sure he dead now because in 1910 when he did this. But listen to what he said. He said he wanted the first to do an ordinance prohibiting African Americans from buying homes on blocks where whites were a majority, and they wanted to make sure it was vice versa. This was a part of his law that he wanted. He says ordinarily the Negro loves to gather to himself, for he is very gregarious and sociable in his nature. But those who have risen somewhat above their fellows appear to have an intense desire to leave them behind, to disown them, as it were, and to get as close to the company of white people as circumstances will permit them. So his ordinance was, don't let them. He said, we need to prevent this at all costs. And it ended up being a law in Baltimore. Now, this is in 1910. And Jonathan and I, when he introduced this to me, I wanted to go back and find out, when did these laws come off the books? Some of these laws didn't come off the books until 60s, until 70s in certain cities. And so now there is a culture that has been permeated, if you will, a thought process that has been brought from generation. Now we're making strides. I'm not being crazy. We're making strides. We really are. But there is still a cultural thing. You all got to understand. I'm 54. I was born in 67. If you go back 10 years to 57, go back 20 years to 47, you'll go back 30 years to 37. I'm not that far removed from the thought process of these ordinances. And without someone bringing this stuff to light, that those highways, and we celebrate you. Thank you so much for allowing us to peek into your business, if you will, with the Biden infrastructure and tearing down those things. But if you'll go back and you all will look at Tulsa, we just celebrated, they were just celebrating 100 years of Tulsa being burned. One of the things, and I shared this with Jonathan before the show, one of the things that was happening is that they did rebuild Tulsa, but what they ended up doing later on was sending a highway through Tulsa to make sure nobody could easily access where that money was. And we want to say, why didn't they just rebuild it? It was by design to make sure that you cut the access off. And if we look at it, that's a lot of stuff that has happened around what we're seeing. And we're glad that somebody like Jonathan is bringing this to our knowledge. I want to ask a question. Why is MLK only on the black side of town?
There are a lot of reasons. One of the main reasons is that, we love we as an American people, we love MLK now that he's dead. But the American people did not love MLK. So
Right.
to want to name a street after someone who was for civil rights, who was for fair treatment, who was for equity, that was not something that a lot of white America wanted. That was something that Black America wanted. And
Right.
so if Black America wanted, then where could we honor him in perpetuity? It was in our neighborhoods. And so I can only think of a few cities where there are MLKs in the white neighborhoods. And I don't know enough history about those areas to know it. Was it always white or did it turn white over time? But that's basically the reason why. I remember working for a city um, before I relocated to Washington, D.C., and they were looking at renaming a street after MLK. And they had proposed a street that was primarily white. And I mean that I had never been to a more intense and more passionate city council meeting. I mean, these people were um, vehemently against naming their street after, a slain civil rights leader.
Hmm.
So it ended up passing that, they got an MLK street, but it was not the original streets that they had proposed. They ended up
Wow.
getting a street in the black neighborhood, and that street where MLK has been named, that street is, I mean, many of the homes have been torn down, many of the businesses they're boarded up, and so it happens, and it's again it's by design, and it's also because we as people, not just black people, but just citizens, we tend to lose our voice the longer something is drawn out. We don't really have that political will to keep
Mm.
saying, no, this is what we want, because we oftentimes forget that elected officials and people who work for the government, we're paid by taxpayers. We're
Right.
paid. So if enough people, make a noise and a fuss, things will get done, which is what we're seeing play out, um, across the news right now with Congress and all of the issues that they have going on. That's really what we see. So
Is that the same issue why I can be on one road and it's one name, and then another road, it's a whole nother name? When like right there where Goodwill is
hmm
in Winston,
hmm
if you turn right, if you turn left, which is going to the black side of town, which leads to like 25th Street or Patterson, whatever it is,
hmm
that road has one name. If I turn left right there at Goodwill, that road is one name. If I turn right and go back towards where there was going towards not Peacehaven, Robin Hood, that same road, it has two different names. And I've wondered why it's the same road,
yeah,
but one turn makes it one name and one turn makes it another name.
yes, there a lot of reasons why. The reason that just comes to my mind right off the top is that a portion of that road may have been built at a different time than the first portion of the road. Let's say the first portion of the road was built in 1990, and the second portion of the road didn't come through until 2021. So that's why it may carry a different name, or it also could be sometimes when people own land and they decide to sell it, or they're donating it or gifting it to an entity, it'll come with restrictions. They'll say, hey, I want this land named after my father or my grandfather. I want this street named after, this. Or a lot of I can recall some of the subdivisions that are near the church that you pastor. They carry names. I can recall one. It's called Doe Run. Well, the lady who owned that land, she loved deer. And so when she sold the land, that was a part of the requirement that the naming of that subdivision carried um, something with the name about deer. And so it's called Doe Run for that reason. And so oftentimes when land is developed or sold, people want to leave a legacy for whatever reason, or something that they have an affinity to or a likeness towards.
So let's say you work in you're in the city planning. All right. I'm getting ready to go buy me some land, and it's gonna have a street on it. And it's gonna have a road on it. It's my road. I bought the land. I got all the land. I want to change that name to S.L. Williams Lane. Is that possible because I own the road, or do I have to go through a series of laws to try to get them changed to have my own road. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. It's a combination of both. It would depend on if that street is a public street or a private street. Private, you probably can change it with little to no hurdles. If it's public, there's just a process of changing the name. We've seen a lot of name changes of streets in Winston and Greensboro over the last 10 or 15 years, where you'll see the honorary markers where it'll say honorary. I think Walter Mack has a street named after him, and some of the other, you know, African Americans who've made like significant strides in the city. So it just depends on if it's a public or private street. Private, that's yours. And a way you can always tell that if a street is private or public, most street signs are green.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, when they're private or they're privately owned or they're managed by someone else, they are of a different color. They may be white with black writing, like near Firebirds in Winston. And that just means that when it comes to the maintenance of those streets and roads, that means the city or whoever the operating agency is who maintains the paving, the snow removal, if there's a pothole, that just tells you who's responsible for maintaining that street.
What you say? I need to get me some money.
So yes, it's what you've been saying throughout the whole conversation is by design. Everything we do is by design.
So, ladies and gentlemen, when you see the roads, I want you to think of Jonathan.
About all that now, please.
When you see the shrubbery,
So,
because Winston just got this
for.
new highway, right? Right? We just got
Yes.
this new highway, and it's a whole lot of because I walked the trail. I made my daughter walk the trail. Lord, gee, she just got to go everywhere I got to go, and there are a bunch of good sidewalks leading down to Old Salem. I mean, it's spacious. We walked across it, and it's got the shrubbery and the green trees. And I was like, so somebody, it's been done by design. Even that street now is not the same name, right? Didn't they change that? It's not Old 40 anymore like we usually
Salem,
talk.
Salem Parkway.
It's Salem Parkway.
Mhm.
And I was saying, my son had something, and he was talking about I'm on 40, and I was like, are you on new 40 or old 40?
Can't do that no more. People
And
don't know that no more.
You don't know that. He didn't know if he was on new 40 or old 40. And I was like, boy, old 40 run through town. New 40 is out around the thing. And he was like, I'm on 40. That's all I can tell you. I said, man, give me the ping of where you are. And I was like, man, if I had known, you should have told me you were over. And it ain't even Old 40. It's Salem Lane.
Parkway. Salem Parkway.
Salem Parkway. They should have named that Stephen Williams Parkway. I ain't have enough money.
I think money talks. I think you're famous enough now that you might.
I want a highway. I want.
Yeah, you can get that to happen. You can get that to happen now. But yes, the naming of highways, all of those things are important as well. We're going through a process in the agency where I work. We're revisiting every street name that's under our authority. And if it has any ties to any slavery, any racial past, anything that intentionally was harmful to African Americans, it will be changed. They're undergoing name changes.
Wow.
And that's also why you see a lot of these statues that are coming down
Right.
across America as well. And we're looking at the names of our schools and the names of our buildings and the names of just everything that because a name is important as well. When you think
Right.
of some place that you like to go to in your city, or what street you got to get to just to get to that building, or what the name of the building is, well, who is that person named after? What were they known for? And is this what we want to be known for as a city or as a neighborhood? Those conversations are happening all across America. I sit sometimes on national calls with like we have these peer reviews where we just converse with each other about success stories. Those things are happening all across the country. And it's a good thing that we're finally, getting to a place where um, we want to make an atonement or kind of address some of America's sins, if you will.
Oh yeah. So I'm gonna give you a final because I can talk to Jonathan on that. I'm interested in just teaching us about housing. What is it that we should be conscious about with housing as blacks and African Americans and whites and wanting to move upscale or whatever it is. And then I want you to just have a final word, if you will, um, because what I said is, where I live, like in my backyard, I can throw a rock, right? And right in my backyard, there are like $300,000 houses, and most of them are occupied by Caucasians. And I can throw a rock right this way, and up the road is African Americans. And on my road, you all, for 23 years, um, I am the only African American family with a male and a female. There is a interracial couple, but on my road that I've been on for 23 years, I'm the only one that has ever lived on my road that is of African American, male and female. And so when we start buying houses or thinking about that whole notion, and maybe I shouldn't ask a question or put that on you. Just know it is by design, as Jonathan has been saying. Do the best you can to be the best you can, to go and do what you can do to make a better you. But understand that a lot of these places, they are built by design, and it still has an undertone. Unfortunately, it still has an undertone, but it doesn't mean you can't break the barrier, and it doesn't mean you can't become and do what it is that you desire to do. Just don't get stuck where you are thinking that that's all there is. There is more. So Jonathan, I appreciate you tonight.
Thank
um,
you.
this has been so informative, and you have been absolutely powerful for us to have as a guest. And I mean, much success to you and what you're doing. I play a lot, but I'm serious on other ends. And and I appreciate your work, man. And I'm glad you are in the trenches helping. I pray that North Carolina will have some people like you to help change the names of things and people that have not been great for society as a whole, because there are some underlying tone things that are still named buildings where people who still believe in slavery and still believe that the black man and black and brown are less than. And so I appreciate you being educated enough and being astute enough and being a fighter enough and being in a position to be able to do what you're doing so that you can make a difference there. And I hope it will inspire somebody to want to go, maybe somebody who's listening, who's a child or grandchild, who will want to go into city planning. You can do something other than rap and make a difference. You can do something other than, there are other things that you can do. And Jonathan, is a shining example that you can make a difference in areas like city planning and knowing the process and making changes and changing laws. Well, I mean, helping people know what those laws are, not necessarily changing them, but at least helping you know what that is and get on the city council and make sure this is just absolutely wonderful. I want you to have final words. I want you to stay on when we go off, but I want you to have final words to the audience. And the floor is yours for you to say whatever you desire to say, sir.
Yeah, so thank you again for having me, and thanks for the kind words. I would like to even assert that you know, city planning, it's everyone's business, and Bishop Williams asked me earlier, how did I get involved in this field? And my answer always is, it's the only thing I knew. Like, I was always fascinated with buildings, with streets. I was telling him I remember being fascinated when they were adding on to Haynes Mall. I was fascinated when they were building the new I-40. My dad was a general contractor. My mother worked for the housing authority. So all I knew was, what we call the built environment. I didn't know those two words together at the time, but that's the only thing I've ever known. I was fascinated when, Goodwill, my home church where I grew up, they put a ramp on the front of the building, or I was fascinated when they renovated the restrooms downstairs, or, you know, just I can remember just little things about growing up that it's helped shaped, my career. Um, and I also remember, I was, sharing with him like you'd visit, you know, some neighborhoods on this side of town or someone's house on this side of town, and it looked this way. And then you go to um, Renolda or Chatelawn or Robin Hood or Polo Road or in Lexington, Fairview Drive, or out to Sapona. And the neighborhoods look totally different. And I was just always fascinated with, well, why is that? And how can I change that? Because I just truly believe that everybody should have access to the type of place that they want to live in. We should not have all of these stipulations that just because you're of a certain income or of a certain color, that you cannot have what we call nice things. I would even go as far as I heard you say something about, rapping. You can still do a really good friend of mine. He's known as the hip hop architect. He majored in architecture. He loves hip hop music. He does a summer camp every year teaching architecture and city planning through the lens of hip hop. And it's worth Googling. Just Google hip hop architect. I'm sure his name will pop up. But you can do, to anyone who's listening, whether young or old, you can still get involved. Again, I'm not on the politics side, but it's the politics that dictates the work that I do. And so if politics is of interest to you, if the environment is of interest to you, if preserving historical resources that are in African American communities are important to you, transportation. And you just sometimes I always tell people, just think about the language that you use when you say, well, it's not safe, or it's too far to walk, or it's so far to drive, or it's so hot outside, or all of these bugs, all of these things, you know, in the field that I work in, that's all trigger language because we use that language to better design the communities where people live, work, and play. But again, thank you for having me. And I'm open to any questions. I am on LinkedIn. People want to know where I am. And yeah, I'm open to more dialogue, more conversation.
Jonathan is all that and a pot of beans, y'all. He is just all that dynamic. I love him, and I say this, publicly to him. I appreciate you. I love you, and I appreciate all the stuff that you're doing. Listen, this has been so informative. Now, y'all wait. Next week, guess what we're talking about next week? The topic next week is I know the healer, but I'm living with HIV.
Wow.
But and you can't get this. You can't get nothing like this, but on Behind the Veil. Behind the Veil. Jonathan, you have been absolutely wonderful. Prevailing Winds. Y'all got to go check it out. Is it Prevailing Winds? Prevailing Winds. Go check it out. Read The Color of Law. Man, you have been absolutely wonderful. I need to have a Color of Law book club so we can just talk about this stuff. Thank you so much. Prevailing Winds. We need to go read that as a TED Talk. Listen, we've got to know. This has been so informative. Thank you, Pastor Alberta, for triggering this conversation. And I appreciate and I love you guys. Look, I got to go. We've been on here a long time tonight. I'm Stephen Williams. You've been on Behind the Veil. They call me the good bishop, but I make a declaration. Ain't nobody good but God. And so here we go. I want you to know that regardless of what you're going through, guess what you are? You good ground. As long as the word of God is seed, if it falls on you, it's going to manifest. You believe whatever it is that God tells you that you can have and that you can be. Again, thank you for joining me. Behind the Veil, Stephen Williams. They call me the good bishop. I gotta go. Jonathan Bush. They call him JB. Thank you so much. We gotta get out of here, y'all. Until the next appointed time. Hey, Cash App us. Send us some money. I might have to send Jonathan to Indonesia or something like that. Might have to send him back to China on there. You can't get this information nowhere else but behind the veil. Thank you. Love you guys. Until our next appointed time, we out of here. Bye-bye.